right there. As Brian mentioned, we're going to continue to go through our study of the minor prophets, which we find ourselves in, I think he said Hacienda last week, otherwise known as Hosea, specifically the 12th chapter, if you really want to get specific tonight. But that's where we'll find ourselves if you want to go ahead and turn there. And we've made our way almost all the way through the whole book of Hosea, and we've seen a lot of different things that we can definitely grow and learn from as we can see their example there before us. But before we begin our study, let's go to God in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you once again for allowing us this opportunity to gather together to study your word, to be able to go over what we see in the book of Hosea, Lord, and the example that the people laid there before us. Lord, help us to be able to learn from their example. Help us to see the ways that they fell and the way that they turned to worldly things instead of to you, Lord, and help us to be able to learn from that. Help us to be able to fixate our eyes and our minds on the things above and not the things here below, Lord. And help us just to continue to chase after you and your truth and to not look at the commandment as something that is burdensome, but something that is good and pleasing and something that is fruitful for not only our soul, but for the kingdom and just for the world in general. Lord, so be with us this evening and just continue to help us to grow closer to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Can y'all back me down just a little bit for when I start screaming here in about 3 or 4 minutes? We don't need to get that loud. Now, as we begin our study, we'll do just a quick little recap of chapter 11 before we get into chapter 12. But as you start to think about everything that's going on for folks that have not been here for our lesson before, the Northern Kingdom has completely gone astray from God, and they've gotten to a lot of idolatry and things of that nature. And it's going to be the reason they end up falling and go into Assyrian captivity here coming up soon, but the southern kingdom is soon to follow, and they've been mentioned a couple times as well into that. And it talks about here at the beginning of chapter 11, which we're going to see a follow up of this in chapter 12. But there in verse 1 of chapter 11, it says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." Now, there's two different ways there's two different verses, I guess you could say, that Egypt, he said, "I called my son." Jesus was called out of Egypt, which is also the son. But they were also called out of Egypt, out of captivity the first time. If you go back and you think about that, and here they are, and it's going to be referenced chapters before and here coming up. But essentially now they are going back to Egypt. Not that they are going to Egypt, but that Assyria is the new Egypt. And what they're really getting at is because of their sin, because of their idolatry, they're now going back into captivity. They're now going back into slavery. And when you really kind of boil down the entire book into the simplest way possible, why are they going to be in slavery? Because of sin. If you think about our lives today in just the simplest form, how do you get into slavery? Sin, right? How do you get out of it? Do God's promise. He made a way with Jesus, right? With the blood of Christ. How could they get out of going into slavery and into captivity? By simply listening, obeying God, right? By never going into this idolatry that they've got themselves into. And so they're going to go into the slavery. They're going to get carried off into captivity because, as you can see in verse 2, they are still offering up sacrifices to Baal. They've got places, high places. And in verse 3, it mentions that he taught them how to walk. He took them up by their arms. Well, when did God take care of them? In the wilderness. And they were there for just a couple of days, right? 40 years. You mean tell me? Yeah. God took care of them for a long time, didn't he? God provided for them for a long time. He parted the sea so they could get through it. That way, Pharaoh and his crew didn't catch back up to them, right? He allowed them to get out of slavery to start off with. And yet here they are falling back into the world. And we talked about this a little bit last week. And you see it in verse 5. It says, "They shall not return to the land of Egypt, but Assyria shall be their king," mentioning that Assyria is going to be the ones that's going to capture them and put them into slavery, "because they have refused to return to me." We talked about this. There are some people in the world today that will teach once saved, always saved. These are God's chosen people, and they were once free, then they were once in slavery, then they were set free, and now what are they going back to? Slavery, right? They were not once saved, always saved. They wouldn't have to go back to slavery to start off with, right? And so they will not return to him. The only way you can return is if you were there to start off with. I can't return to the church building if I was never there to start off with, right? The same way with us. They have done a lot of horrible, horrible things, as you can see throughout the book of Hosea, but even some of the other minor prophets we've already talked about, yet they still can return to God. Saul did a bunch of horrible things. They could still, or Saul still, right, was able to turn to Paul, return to God when they're on Damascus Road, and then we know how that story continues out after the Damascus Road. So we're going to continue to kind of hammer down that point this evening. But in verse 7, it says, "My people are bent on turning away from me, and though they call out to the Most High, he shall not raise them up at all." God's allowing them to go and chase after what they have basically said to him. This is what they want to chase after. He's going to allow them to go into captivity because they are, as we're going to see in chapter 12, relying on Egypt, relying on Assyria, trying to make ties with these different folks, trying to make ties with the people around them. Instead of leaning on God, they're trying to lean on their own strength. And in chapter or verse 8, you see something interesting. We'll see who remembers this from last week. But he says, "How can I give up on you, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboam? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender." What are the two towns at the end of chapter 8, the two cities? Where are they from? Y'all remember that from last week? They were two that were destroyed there with Sodom and Gomorrah. How could I ever let you be destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah? How could I ever allow my people to ever be destroyed like that? And listen to this compassion he shows. My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. He says in verse 9, "I will not execute my burning anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim. For I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath." His heart has compassion. Why would he not flood the earth again? Why would he not just send down burning coal and everything else like he did on Sodom and Gomorrah? Why does he allow us to live this evening? Because his loving kindness. Because he still has compassion and patience, and he's still waiting for more people to turn if they would simply turn. That's love. And if you look at the end of this, I mean, I'm sure this is other people too can probably agree with this, but the end of verse 9 is literally me in a nutshell. For I am God, not a man. Because if he were like me, he wouldn't have made it this far, right? If this says I am, well, let's going to talk about Jacob here in a second. If I am Jacob, right, this place would have been what? Torn up just like Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, how long would you have lasted if continuously the people that you've saved and you've rescued and you've nurtured, you've taken care of, they just keep turning back to worldly things. They keep turning back over and over and over again, right? Yet his patience is still there. Now, he's eventually going to allow a day where they're going to have to answer for their sins and answer for the iniquity they built up. But he's allowing them. He's tried to allow them. He sent messengers to them. He's tried to call them back in. His patience, his love, his grace, his forgiveness is so much greater than ours. It's so much of an example for us.
Like, how many chances would somebody get would depend on how much I love them. If I don't care too much about them, they might get one chance. But if I love them, they're going to get more chances. So, how much more would God be like that, even when He doesn't have to be?
Yeah. And she brings up a good point about, um, how much would we want to forgive someone would depend on how much we care and, stuff like that about how many chances we give them. Boy, God's given us a lot of chances, hasn't he? Boy, God gave them a lot of chances, hasn't he? So many chances.
It doesn't mean He has to.
It doesn't mean he has to. What we need to really stop and think about is what are we doing with the chances that he's given us? Because there's plenty of people that take the chances that God's given them and they don't the least bit take advantage of. They don't use it. They're just like, maybe he'll give me another chance tomorrow. There's only so many times you can lay down that Uno card of like, maybe tomorrow, I'll turn it around. Eventually that Uno card's going to come up blank and it's going to be like a reverse or a skip or whatever. I don't know, draw 30. And you're like, I'm in rough shape, right? eventually the shot clock's going to hit zero, right? You're not going to have any more cards. You're not going to be able to pass it to the next day. You're not going to be able to kick the can down the road. And so, with the chance that God has given us, with the opportunity that God has given us, with the forgiveness that He's given us, what are we doing with that chance? What are we doing with that hope that He's afforded us? Because that's what they're missing right here. What has God given them? The promised land. Is that terrible soil or good soil? Pretty good soil, isn't it? Right? He's taking care of them. And what are they doing with that opportunity that He's afforded them?
Waste.
Wasting it away, right? Using the crops that they've gotten, now they're going to go trade and get silver and gold, and they're going to turn it into idols, and they're going to worship those man-made idols, right? God's given them so many things, and they're not using them, right? They're wasting them away. Sue?
This whole book of Hosea starts out with God as like the husband to Israel wife, and they messed up. He still loved them for that. And now, as we're getting into chapter 11, it's saying he's treating them as my son. And that's what the times he's referred to his father in the Old Testament generally are. But last week I said they all were, and I found out that's not true. There was one time when God spoke to David and said, Samuel be like my son, I'll be like a father to him. So that was one where it was individuals and not a nation. So I wanted to straighten that out last week.
Well, I appreciate you straightening that out. Now, Sue did mention a good point. It's like a marriage there in the first couple of chapters. It'll carry throughout it, but essentially they're an adulterous relationship is the way that Hosea would mention it in the first several chapters. But essentially they're supposed to be in a marriage with God, and they are essentially cheating on God. They're in an adulterous relationship, and what they're cheating on God with is all these false idols. And you could loop that into our life today. If we want to be in a relationship with God, are we faithful to God, or are we dabbling in several other relationships as well, right? You look at marriage today. If you get married to someone, God would expect, and I'm sure your spouse would expect, that you would remain faithful to them. They wouldn't appreciate it if you went and you dabbled in like 8 or 9 or 10 other relationships and made your spouse like 15th on the list. Well, they wouldn't appreciate it, and neither would God, right? And that's what the nation, the Northern Kingdom, is doing right here, and the Southern Kingdom will follow later on. But the Northern Kingdom essentially is in this relationship that's supposed to be exclusive with God. They're supposed to be all in for God, yet they're dabbling in all these other things that's in an adulterous relationship with Him. And as we start to look in chapter 12, it starts off, and this wind is mentioned here earlier chapters on, but it says, Ephraim feeds on the wind and pursues the east wind all day long. They multiply falsehood and violence. They make a covenant with Assyria, and oil carried to Egypt. So when you start to think about the wind, this is mentioned. They sow the wind earlier, 3 or 4 chapters ago. They sow the wind, they reap the whirlwind. This wind is really just an example for something that is empty, something that is misleading, something that kind of gets blown about, as it's mentioned before. But when you start to think about, they pursue the east wind. The east wind is something that we see throughout different minor prophets, but it's a harsh wind. It's a wind that brings about destruction and things of that nature. And so when you start to think about earlier, they sowed the wind, they reaped the whirlwind, right? They reaped things that were um, thrown about, and therefore they're going to reap things that are thrown about. They're going to reap the iniquity that they're sowing. Well, here Ephraim feeds on the wind. They feed on things that are void. They feed on things that are not going to help them spiritually. They feed on things that are not from God, and they pursue the east wind all day long. They are pursuing things that are going to destroy them. Now, we've talked about this in previous chapters. We have to be careful as Christians, as human beings, as people who have a soul that is going to live for eternity in one of two destinations. We have to be careful that we are not consuming things that are going to destroy us, because they're getting destroyed by their neighbors. Because instead of them being a positive influence on them, they're allowing the neighbors' religions to come in and change how they are treating God, how they are worshiping God. And so this east wind that they're pursuing is destroying them. This idolatry, these other things they're pursuing is destroying them from within. It's weakening all of them. It's going to be the reason that they're going to lose everything and go off into captivity. Then it goes on to say that they multiply falsehood and violence. They're multiplying the falsehood against one another, but also by their actions when you think about how they're acting with God. If you say you're the chosen ones of God, if you say you know God, if you say you love God, then why are you doing these things? Why are you chasing after Baal and all these other false gods. But the violence too, we've talked about this previously, but you have different assassinations or assassination attempts. You have them treating the prophets that come bearing a message from God horribly. You have them treating one another bad. You have them taking advantage of the poor and different things of that nature. But they're multiplying this falsehood, this violence. They're multiplying iniquity. They're multiplying sin because they're so stuck in it. So they make a covenant with Assyria. And they did make a covenant with Assyria back in, let's see if I have it in my notes right here. I had the date. They paid a tribute to Assyria and entered into an alliance with the nation. I don't have the date. I'm sorry, I lied. But when that did fall through, they ended up selling oil. You can see this in 2 Kings 17, verse 4. They ended up making an alliance with Egypt, which is the second half of that reference. But they first make a covenant with Assyria. Well, when that goes sour, what do? Well, now you turn to somebody else. And then you start having oil is carried out to Egypt, like I said, mentioned in 2 Kings. What could they have been doing anyways? Who could they have been? Who should have they been making a covenant with? The Lord. The whole time. It would be like America trying to make an alliance. God's upset with America. He probably is with some of the things we do. We're trying to make an alliance with all these other nations to save us and protect us. Who should we be turning to anyways? God, right? It's who all nations should be turning to. It's who all people should be turning to. And so they're making these covenants with the folks around them instead of just turning back to the Lord. And we've seen that mentioned before. Their heart is not with the Lord. He's mentioned that numerous times. Verse 2, it says, the Lord has an indictment against Judah and will punish Jacob according to his ways. He will repay him according to his deeds. Now, there's a couple different things that you can start to see here. So Judah's mentioned. The northern and southern kingdom are both going to fall into punishment at different times. But listen to what it says in the middle of verse 2. And this is something that we need to think about in two different aspects. He says, I will punish Jacob according to his ways. He will repay him according to his deeds. What is he repaying him for? Whose ways? His ways. And what is he going to be repaid by according to whose deeds? His deeds. Two different ways you can look at that. Who has to answer for the sin in our life? Right? How do you, whose coattails can you ride to get into heaven? No one's. Two different ways you can look at it. Just because your whole family is believers, you grew up as a preacher's kid or, whatever, your grandpa was a preacher, whatever, right? So-and-so was so faithful and oh boy, they're in heaven, therefore I must be good. We have to answer for our own actions, right? We have to answer for our own deeds. Now, there's ways you can look at that, right? You don't have to be like the generation before you. If your generation was off kilter, if your generation was away from God, that doesn't mean you have to stay away from God. Because you can be the generation that turns things around for future generations in your lineage, right? Now, vice versa, you can also be the one that you should stay with it, right? Don't be the one that turns away at the generation before or with God. And so he's punished according to his ways and according to his deeds. It says, in the womb, he took his brother by the heel, and in his manhood, he strove with God. This is funny because it's all about Jacob here. So he in the womb, he took his brother's, whole thing just moved. He took his brother by the heel. Sorry, I skipped like 3 chapters down. In the womb, he took his brother by the heel. Y'all remember when this took place? Why did he take his brother by the heel? What could you say he was striving for early on before he ever exited the womb? Trying to get out first. And what happens if he got out first? Birthright. Had to get the birthright, right? It's a great name, right here mentioned in the Bible. In his manhood, he strove with God. When did he do that? Y'all remember this? Wrestled with God. He wrestled with the angel of God out there in the what's it called? The desert. It's in Genesis 32. I have it in my notes. I forgot the name of it now. But Jacob wrestled with the angel there, and so you have these two different things. As you start to look at his life and what God is trying to get out here, what Hosea is trying to get out here, he was eager for the birthright. He strove with God. And then you go and you look at, in verse 4, it says, he strove with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. Then it goes on, he says, he met God at Bethel, and there God spoke with us. As you start to look at this, what do you see in the life of Jacob and these different things that are mentioned?
Some deceit.
Some deceit. What also was he eager for? I guess you could say by the fact that he grabbed the hill. The Lord's blessings. He was striving for the Lord's blessings, but also, as you're going to see later on, he's going to offer up prayer. As you start to think about this whole thing, he's going to use Jacob as an example for how they should be living now anyways, because they've lost the fact of their lineage. They've lost what the generations before them had done, whether it be good or bad, how they have chased after God or how they had fallen away from God. They're losing that. They're not following after that. So he took his brother by the hill. He strove with God. We talked about that. That's there in Genesis 32, starting in verse 25. So he prevailed, he wept, and he sought his favor. Now, Jacob has several different things going on throughout his life, but when you go down to the whole grand scheme of things, Jacob, and then it goes on into the kids and everything else, and then Joseph is the one that even gets them into Egypt to start off with. You have that whole story that takes place. And then that's when the kids end up coming back. His brothers end up coming back, and that's how the whole captivity thing starts, which leads them out of the wilderness, out of captivity, and now they are essentially returning back to captivity because of the way that they have treated God. You see how quick the generations have forgotten what has happened before them? They're not learning from history. They're not learning from what the generations before had done, right? They're not learning from the mistakes of their fathers. So he met God at Bethel. That's most likely going to reference the time where his name was changed from Jacob to Israel. And so you start to think about that. He says, I am the Lord, right? I'm the Lord your God. And he says he met God at Bethel, and there God spoke with us, right? He gave them the blessing. There was a covenant done whenever his name was changed over. It says the Lord, the God of hosts, the Lord is his memorial name. Who is he? The Lord, the God. He is the one that is controlling all this. Who is the one that hung everything into place? Who is the one that spoke things into existence? You have this whole thing that is taking place. Who is the one that has provided them manna in the wilderness? Who is the one that has provided them the fruit? Who is the one that's provided the rain so that their crop can harvest? Who is the one that gave them the promised land? Who's the one that protected them during the wars? Who's the one that has provided all these things for them? Was it the golden calf that they made? No, it was God. He's trying to call them back to a remembrance of the things that have been there before, things that they should be remembering. If you think back to our life, if you've given your life to Christ and you've been submerged in the water, think back to that moment. What commitment were you making to God? Think back to that moment. So many people come out of that water, they are on fire. On fire. And boy, the world just eats at you once you come out of that water. Just try to eat you up. Sometimes we can walk around kind of as a, I don't know if moping is the right word, but just a depressed Christian, I guess you could say, acting like we've forgotten how much God has done for us. God has done so much for us, and He has allowed us something so much greater. And we need to remember the things that God has done for us, the things that God has promised us, how much God has helped us, afforded us, something that nothing in this world can do. And so they have forgotten, they have forsaken God, they've forgotten the things that have happened before, and therefore they've turned away, they've lost the fear of the Lord. So it goes on in verse 6 and says, so you, by the help of your God, return. By whose help? God's, right? It's all about God. If you go back chapters before, what were they trying to rely on? Their military power, strength, all those things. Their own alliances, their own power. They were relying on what?
Syria and Egypt.
Yeah. Relying on self. They were relying on world, right? They weren't relying on God. They weren't thinking about God could save them. They weren't thinking about God could rescue them. God was an afterthought in their life, and you can see that by their actions. So it says, so you, by the help of your God, return. Now, when you return, what things do you have to do? Hold fast to love and justice. What were two things they were not holding fast to? Love and justice, right? Were they showing one another love by their actions? We saw that before, right? What were they doing? Ramping up iniquity, ramping up wickedness, right? They were striving against one another. So they weren't reaping up love. They weren't holding fast love. If we want to be with God today, if we claim to have a relationship with God today, are we holding fast to love? Loving one another. Now, I know Dale mentioned this. I've mentioned this 1,000 times over. It is so easy, isn't it? Everyone raise their hand if you think the easiest thing that we're told to do in the Bible is to love your enemy. Nobody's going to raise their hand. I can't believe it, right? It's difficult, isn't it? God gives us such a great example here of love. Because who is his enemy in this whole story? His own people. Because they're striving against him. The people who he wants to save, the people who he wants to be with, the people that he's afforded so much to are becoming his enemy because they are striving against him. Sound like us if we strive against him? Hold fast to love. Hold fast to what else? Justice. Their whole court system was corrupt. They were taking advantage of the poor, keeping money for themselves. We're going to see that here in a second about them talking about how rich they are because they've just made themselves rich. So hold fast to love and justice if you want to return to God. And also what? And wait continually for your God. New Testament, we say you should wait what? Eagerly. We should eagerly await that day. Why should we eagerly await the return of the Lord? For a Christian, it's a good day, isn't it? For a Christian, it's a real good day. Now, if you're away from Christ, you don't want to eagerly await that day because you're not ready for it, right? But a Christian should eagerly await that day. We should always be waiting for him to return, right? And so there's things that if they're going to return to God, they have to fix in their life. We talked about this before about them needing to plow the field and get the field right, get the poisonous weeds out as it's mentioned chapters before. They have to be able to identify the things in their life they need to change, get those things out so they can have the good seed planted. We in our life have to do the same thing. If we have turned away from God, we're going to have to leave those things that we've turned to, right? So that we can turn back to God. You don't just get to return to the Lord and bring all your baggage in and be like, I'm holding on, I'm keeping all of it, right? You can't be 1 foot on, 1 foot off. You got to be all in for God. Right? And we should stick out in the world because he's called us to be different. And so as it goes on in verse 7, listen to what all they have going on. A merchant in whose hands are false balances, he loves to what? Oppress. Does he love to reap love? Does he love to be kind to his neighbor? Does he love his enemy? No, he loves to what? Oppress. Because he has what? False balances. You think he's being fair to the people? Think he's being fair to one another? Or you think he's looking out for his own interests and his own interests only? His own interests only is what he's looking out for, right? He's not being honest. He's loving to oppress. He's trying to take advantage of people. And listen here in verse 8. Ephraim has said, but I am rich. I have found wealth for myself. In all my labors, they cannot find in me iniquity or sin. How are we rich today?
It depends on your definition of rich.
What's the best kind of rich?
Richly blessed.
Yeah. People today, if you go out on the street and you ask people, how do you become rich? I would venture to guess a extremely high majority will say something about how you have to have a certain job, win the lottery, I don't know, get some crazy big inheritance, I don't know what. Something where you get a whole bunch of money, and that's how you become rich. Maybe you get into sales, get into businesses, right? And you do what this merchant has done, and you have false balances and you press people to get more money and more gain for yourself. How does a Christian become rich? By the love of God. It's richness that the world can't give you. It's richness that any amount of green dollars cannot give you. Or if they get rid of the paper currency, I guess it doesn't matter how much e-currency you have, or whatever they're going to call that one day. Richness from God. That's what we're striving after. We're not striving after the richness of this world. And if we do become rich on this world, Who does that money even belong to start off with? We are just simply holding the money. He's just simply lending us these things. And that's what I'm getting at with them. He has lent them things to use. They're not using them accordingly, right? He has lent us finances in America that far outweigh almost every other country by a long margin. How are we using the things that God has afforded us, right? So he has lent us these things. We need to be using them for the kingdom. And so they have found themselves rich. He says, I have found wealth for myself. Not for other people, but for myself. It's all about me. It's all about I. Gil?
God created for the wealth that they know.
Yep.
It's there, just, they were taking credit, but it's God and it's possible.
Yeah. And Gail brings a good point. They're not giving credit to God. They're not giving credit to God for a lot of things. We've talked about that chapters before. But do you not see that in our world today? That is my car, my house, my money, my. I always make the joke that we have iPhones. It's all about I. iPad's all about I. I have a MacBook Pro, but here or there.
It's that God has given us all of this, and we are stewards
Yep.
of what He has given us. It is up to us to what we do with that, and He has placed that responsibility on us to be stewards of His blessings and His gifts that He gives us.
Yeah.
He's given us dominion over all the earth and what's in it.
Yeah, when you think about being stewards of what he's blessed us with, 4 or 5 chapters before, he called the northern kingdom useless vessels. Why were they useless?
We're doing anything right.
Weren't doing anything for God. They were useless. They couldn't be used because they had deemed themselves unable to be. Because of their actions, they had made themselves useless. It's not that God wanted them to be useless. It's not that God even deemed them as being useless. He knew they could be used. They just didn't want to be used by God. And so as you go to look at this, they say that they have all this wealth for themselves, right? They're not giving any credit to God. They're taking all the credit themselves. And here in verse 9 it says, I am the Lord your God from the land of Egypt. I will again make you dwell in tents as in the days of your appointed feast. Well, those appointed feasts, you didn't get to stay in all your fancy ivory houses, right? You had to have tents and everything else. Well, if you go to think about this, what are they about to lose? All of their ivory houses and the wealth that they're depending on and everything else. They're going to lose all that God has lent them to be stewards of because they're not using it accordingly. Their iniquity is built up. Now God's going to send them off into captivity, and they're going to lose those things because he is the one that is in control. And he says, I spoke to the prophets. It was I who multiplied visions, and through the prophets gave parables. Who was it that was affording these things all this time? God. And that's what they're missing. He's trying to draw them back to this. What did Jacob end up realizing? What did Joseph realize? What did these people before them realize? God is affording these things. That's what they're missing. He said, I spoke to the prophets. Who's the one that sent all these messengers to you to try to call you out of the sin that you were in? I sent them. Who's sending Hosea? It's not like Hosea is just going out on a limb being like, I think this is what God wants me to say. He has a message from God. So did the other prophets that are bringing them this testimony. Says, it was I who multiplied visions and through the prophets gave parables. He is the one trying to call them out of this. If there is iniquity in Gilead, there shall surely come to nothing. Now, some of your all's translations may say something quite different or slightly different in verse 11. It could say that if Gilgal's worthless, there shall be only nothing. The worthless there, or the iniquity there, kind of hints at the fact that they have a moral decay. Why do they have this moral decay? Because they're going into the worldly things. And that's what I was mentioning that earlier. They're kind of they're allowing things, they're consuming things into their body, soul-wise, spiritually wise, that is essentially just wreaking havoc on everything because of what they're consuming, right? People today love to, it's not as big of a, I guess, a craze now as it was maybe 10 years ago. You got to look at every food. You got to look at all the ingredients. You got to look at all, what am I consuming for my body? Is it going to cause this? Is it going to cause that? All these different things. You want to look at all these ingredients. Got to count my calories and everything else. Do we do that with what we take in, like in the worldly sense, by the music we listen to, the TV we watch, the people that we hang around, anything like that? Do we ever think about what we're consuming in that sense? Because it can be far more dangerous. It might not be bad physically for the body, but it could wreak havoc on the soul, which is far worse, right? Because the world can wreak havoc on the body, and that could be one thing. But the soul lives on. If the soul goes to a better place, you've won the battle that's at hand. So it could be the offense that the worthless or the iniquity there that is built up could be this, could suggest the moral decay that they have going on. The nothing there, ooh, that was real loud. Get y'all's attention. The nothing there is kind of just the whole physical deterioration of the nation because they have this moral decay. Now, essentially, the whole nation is going to decay because Assyria is going to come in and wipe it out, right? And so they're going to lose all these things because they have this moral decay. So in Gilgal, they sacrifice bulls. Their altars also are like stone heaps on the furrows of the field. They have this iniquity built up. They're going to come to nothing as Assyria comes in. But if you start to look at this, they sacrifice these bulls. And when you start to look at Gilgal and stuff like that, it's near Jericho, but it ends up becoming one of the centers or one of the main places of this idolatrous worship. A place that is not nearly supposed to be like that is now coming essentially a mecca of idolatrous worship. And so they have these altars that are also going to be like stone heaps. And if you're going to furrow up a field, if you're going to turn up a field, as we talked about earlier, what do you not want jammed all up in that field? Rocks. Don't you love big? I always think of when I read this or even think about this, I always think about the farmer that has the big tillers going out and they catch this like just monster. It's a boulder. They can call it a rock, whatever they want. It's huge. Got some poor guy out there with like a sledgehammer, trying to knock that thing out from between it. That ain't no fun, right? Who put that rock there? The Lord did. Adam. I swear, if Adam didn't, Um, no, but they make these sacrifices. They have these altars that are like stone heaps, right? These altars are going to be what when Assyria comes in? These altars are going to be what once God allows this essentially to come to an end? Torn down. No more. Done away with. Because they're not tilling their soil, because they're not recognizing the poisonous weeds that are around them and plucking them out so they can have good soil, plant what is good there in their fields, God's going to come in. These altars, no more. Going to be torn down. There's not going to be anything left of that. And as you start to look at this, verse 12, Jacob fled to the land of Aram. There Israel served for a wife, and for a wife he guarded sheep. Y'all remember what Jacob had to do? How many years he had to serve?
14 altogether.
14 years. How many wives did he get? 2. How many was he trying to get? 1. He had to do a little bit of work, didn't he? He was there for just a little while. He ended up having to flee. But as you think about that, he was working for it. He was striving for it. Then as it goes on in verse 13, by a prophet the Lord brought Israel up from Egypt, and by a prophet he was guarded. Who's that prophet that brought Israel up from Egypt? Moses. I always want to say Noah. I don't know if anyone else wanted to say that, but every time I want to say Noah. Moses brought them up, and he was what? Guarded. Did Moses think that he was ready for this event whenever God first came to him? Sure didn't. But Moses ends up leading them up out of that. He has God's help. He relies on God. Verse 14, Ephraim has given bitter provocation, so his Lord will leave his blood guilt on him, and he will repay him for his disgraceful deeds. For whose deeds? His deeds. Now, with the final 3 minutes we have, based on how we adjusted the clock before class, I want us to think about this. When you go back to the very beginning of chapter 11, God wants to afford them rescue. Now, they've gotten so far to the point that it has just gone essentially beyond rescuing, where they're going to end up in captivity. But when you think about all that they have done, God, at the end of chapter 11, still does not want to completely wipe them out like those towns next to Sodom and Gomorrah. He still wants to allow them some remnant, doesn't want to completely get rid of them because of his grace, because of his compassion. Now, when you look at them, did the northern and southern kingdom make a lot of mistakes in this? Just a couple, right? They had a whole bunch of them. They had fallen after so many worldly things, they couldn't look up and see straight. They got so many false idols, they probably don't even know which ones are false anymore and which ones are true because they're just so invested. They're so surrounded by them, right? Because earlier on there in chapter 11, he says they've surrounded the throne with lies. They've just surrounded everything with lies, right? Their whole life is now consumed with falsehood and idolatry. Boy, they're in rough shape. Does God still love them? Did he completely wipe them out?
We brought it back.
He brings back some of them. Now, not all of the northern kingdom is going to come back. Portion of them will. Southern kingdom is different, right? There's going to be some of the lineages are still going to make it. What does God want for them? Salvation. When you look at our lives today, and I used the example of Saul earlier, these folks have gotten so backwards. They don't know up, down, left, right, right? They have fallen into so many different things. God still does not want to completely destroy them because he's God and not people. We can never comprehend God's love, God's salvation that he's provided, God's grace, his patience. It'll never make sense to any of us. It surely don't make sense to me because I don't know how he's still patient when I look out in the world. Even if I look at my own life, I don't know how he's even still so patient with me. Yet he is. This is the thought I want to leave with everyone tonight. What are we doing with the patience that he is affording us? Because these folks here in Hosea, completely wasting it. We in our lives today cannot waste the patience that the Lord is providing us. We cannot waste the forgiveness that he has provided us, the grace, the promises of a home above. We cannot waste what God has given us. What a shame. It talks about this in earlier chapters. What a shame would it be when we go and we get led off into captivity, right? That shot clock hits zero. When we get led off and we look back at all those things that we put our trust in and we say, how foolish was that? And there ain't nothing we can do about it anymore because we're stuck there in captivity. How foolish was I to put all my trust in these worldly things instead of God? We have to make sure we put our trust in him. We learn from this example. Don't waste what God has given us. Use every day as the precious day that it is because we're only afforded so many. Sue?
So our material blessings, we should be thankful to God for, but our spiritual blessings in Christ, that we're just bounding from as Christians.
Yeah. Yeah. He's afforded us so much, and so much of it we don't even know what we've been afforded because our brains cannot comprehend all that God has done. And so, my encouragement for all of us is to not waste a single second or a single day. They are so wrapped up in the worldly things, they are wasting it all away, and it's going to lead to their destruction because of what they're consuming. We have to make sure that we are consuming things that are good for the soul, things that lead to storing up treasures in heaven so that we're not wasting the day. Right? We can't waste the day with silly drama stuff and silly things that the world is throwing at us when God has afforded us so much. And so that's the thought I'll leave with us this evening if there's no other questions or thoughts or comments.
Well, the ultimate catch is not the captivity that's spoken of there, but it's a foretaste, a tiny foretaste of the real captivity at the end.
Yeah, and I'll end on this, but Mark brings up a good point. As some of those in the northern kingdom go off into captivity, there's some that are never going to come back. When that shot clock hits zero for us, if we've decided to depend on the world and never give our life to Christ, we're going to end up in a captivity that we're never going to see the end of. It's not like we're going to get to come back, right? We're not going to get to come back to the promised land. Our life The way that we live our life today should be telling God that we want to inherit the promised land that is of heaven. Our life should be screaming that at God, that I am fully invested in you, love you, want to chase after you, don't look at your commandments as burdensome. I want heaven. That's what our life should be screaming at God. Their life is screaming, I want idolatrous worship, right? I want worldly things. So what is our life telling God? It's a good thought. Thank you, brother. Go to Brian and Morgan for our awesome.
It's not too loud, is it? Well, for this devotional, one thing that I've noticed the older I get is, you reflect on things that happened when you were younger and you just want to kick yourself in the pants, you know. So way back in the faraway land of 2011, I was 15 years old and knew everything and had everything figured out, except how to conduct myself in the classroom, apparently. Um, I had just gotten back from, and I don't know if they still do it in Gatlinburg, but it was a youth rally called Winterfest. They would rent out the convention center downtown, and my congregation would usually go at night, and we would have singing, and they would do skits, and it was really great. But during the day, we teamed up with our friends, and we walked around Gatlinburg, and being in Gatlinburg, coming from at the time I was living in Lowndes County, Mississippi, it was like an alien planet. And they had a magic shop. It's closed now, but they had this wonderful little prank powder. You could take that powder, and essentially Jello powder, and then that stuff that they put in diapers, which I'm extremely familiar with. And you would put that in someone's drink, and it would solidify their drink in a matter of seconds. Maybe not even that. It was very fast. So I had the genius idea of, 'cause like I said, I had everything figured out. Of when I got back to school after that weekend, that I was going to prank a couple of my friends in my English class, and they thought it was funny, so it worked out. But I was like, okay, well, I should take it even further. So my English teacher stepped out into the hall to talk to somebody. So I was like, there it is. And she had a big old bottle of smart water, and I went and poured it into smart water, and I went and sat back down. Now, keep in mind, she had seen me do this to a couple of my friends in class, and she thought it was funny. She laughed, and I made a very, uh, a very, very specific mental note of that. And I went to band after that to, I went there as fast as I could because I was dating a saxophone player at the time. Now we have 4 children. And, and so, I'm getting my trombone put together. I was first chair, not a big deal, kind of, sort of. And my English teacher comes to the door of the band hall. I'm like, oh, there it is. So I get up, and she's like, did you do this with my water? I was like, yeah. I was, it was just that joke stuff I was using. I took my wallet out, and I knew smart water was expensive. It still is. I took out a $5 bill, which was a lot of money in that time, 2011. And I was like, here you go. It was just a prank. Oh, no, keep the money. Just, let's not do that again. No problem. No problem. Put the money back in there. An hour later, I'm called to the principal's office and told that I had put methamphetamine in my teacher's water, and she had written a letter to the superintendent of the county school system. And I'm quoting her words because I got a physical copy of it. Quoting her words, she said that I attempted to assassinate her, which the Webster's definition of assassination is to kill someone for political gain. Uh, so I was, those old Looney Tunes where, Tom and Jerry would, Tom would mess something up in the house chasing Jerry, and he's just like looking up at the bubble, and like you can see like the coroner getting ready to come to the house and stuff. Because I knew my dad was going to kill me. My dad, still does, but when we were younger, even harder. He worked even harder when Chase and I were younger. So I have to make this call to my parents and say, hey, I'm suspended for 10 days pending an expulsion. I need you to come and pick me up. which is an interesting phone call to make. And my mom at the time, I believe she and Chase were in Franklin, Tennessee doing Bible Bowl, just to make it even more embarrassing. So I was left at the mercy of my dad. And remember that word. So, I told my now wife, and, she started crying. And my mother-in-law worked at the school, and I went and stayed in her room until my dad had come to get me. And I looked out, Benita, my mother-in-law, I looked out her window and I saw the white F-150. And, I'm just picking out, I'm like, I hope I get a granite tombstone and not marble. And so about 45 minutes goes by, which I thought was really odd. And so he comes and to Benita's room and doesn't say a word. He just opens the door. And so I get up and I go with him and I get in the truck. He doesn't say a word. And he drops me off at our house and he left. And I assumed he was going back to work, and he was. And he got back about 6:30 that night. And I had already like taken my Xbox out of the wall and put it on his bed, and I'm taking my TV and putting it in there. I'm just like, I've read this book 7 times, but I'm going to read it for the 8th time, man. He gets in and changes out of his work clothes, and he comes and opens my door, and I'm trying to like find the words, and he says, "Where do you want to eat dinner?" And I said, "How about Prophet's Porch?" And so we went and ate Prophet's Porch, and he told me I was granted for a week, and that he had a discussion that was very loud with my principal and got it to where I was knocked down to 3 days of in-school suspension. And that's all that happened. I didn't, catch a belt like I thought I was going to. I didn't even lose my Xbox for as long as I thought, back then that was the biggest thing you could have was an Xbox. And he showed me mercy. And at the time, I was just a, 15-year-old idiot. I didn't know, I didn't realize that I had to have my dad, who worked on an hourly, wage, stop working, leave, come and pick me up, take me home, then have to go all the way back to work later to cover for the time that he lost, and then come back home on top of all that. And then he had to put up with me. And I didn't realize, how serious that was back then. And I definitely do now. But he showed me mercy. And it's something I wasn't expecting because I didn't feel like I deserved it. And, I feel like a similar story for that is Jonah. And Jonah is one of those stories where, like, even me reading it as a person, you know, anytime Jonah does anything in that story, you're just like, you just do what you're told. Do what you know you're supposed to do. Do what you've been told to do. Do what God has instructed you to do. And throughout the story, I'm not even going to pick a particular verse because you don't even have to in this story. He shows him mercy over and over and over and over again, whether it's, not letting him drown, not letting him, be thrown from a boat, not letting him be completely consumed by this fish, not by letting him not be killed by the people in Nineveh, by letting him have shade in the heat over and over and over and over and over and over again. He proves that Jonah is just not quite getting it. And like I said, me as a person, it's like, you have God directly speaking to you, and you're so pig-headed and so full of yourself, and you think you know everything. You think oh, well, I know the Ninevites aren't gonna do what you want to do, because that's who they are. That's how they are. I already know that. I already know what's gonna happen. And he has no idea. And he just proves that over and over again throughout that story. And over and over and over again, Jonah has shown mercy. And I think that that's a trending thing, especially in the minor prophets, as we've seen with what Jacob's been teaching us on Wednesday, whether it's Hosea, whether it was in Amos. The whole concept is that God is speaking through his prophets, just listen. Just listen. I'm telling you how to fix your problems. I'm telling you how to change what you need to change in order to get your family, get you as a people on the right path. And over and over again, they keep letting them down. And they're led into captivity, or they have plague that hits them, or they're, pick, pick what happens when they don't do what they know they're supposed to do. Despite the fact that over and over and over again, God shows them mercy. And, you know, going forward a little bit into Matthew, in chapter 10, you know, Jesus even says in verse 32, so everyone who acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. So he even tells you that if you do what you know what you're supposed to do, if you do what we tell you, and we being, in this case, God and Jesus, both, if you do what you're told, if you do what you know you're supposed to do, you will have mercy. And I think everybody at a certain point in their life kind of comes to the understanding of maybe that's right. Maybe that is what's supposed to happen, whether we're raised that way, whether we are raised that way and get pig-headed and think we know everything and then try to figure it out on our own, and then you inevitably come back like the prodigal son. Or maybe you know somebody that's never been taught this. No, maybe you know somebody that wasn't raised in the way that a lot of us in here were raised. Some of us weren't raised in the church, and we still find our way to him. So tonight, if you need to take advantage of some of that mercy, or if you need anything, if you need a prayer, if you need advice, if you just need a hug, let us know. And Brian's going to lead us in an invitational song.